Hi, everybody. This is Gina here again, welcoming you back for our next session. I have the great privilege and pleasure to introduce my colleagues here, actually, who I've worked with for 20 years and published 2 books with. Linda Morris Kelley and Bill Russell, and also Nalini Kumaran, who I have worked with for 25 years, all the way back in the day at AT&T. And so they're going to give a presentation now on the critical importance of systems thinking and mental models for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Please join me in welcoming Linda, Bill, and Nalini.
Good morning, everyone. We're very glad to be here. I'm Linda Kelley, and I have been working with systems for the last 30 years, whether it is eco-social systems or economic systems, individuals, because we are systems, or teams. And also been using virtual technologies for quite a while to provide a lot of noise. So if can mute the noise, that would be helpful. Thank you. Nalini.
Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be given this opportunity to speak, everybody. I'm a HR professional with a degree in human resource management. I've worked in large corporations like AT&T and Verizon. Currently, I'm working in the field of sustainability with Gina and my colleagues to look at opportunities that exist as a HR person and a compensation professional in moving the total rewards towards sustainability.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bill Russell, and I really just wanted to build off of the start that you just heard from people like Gary Cohen and Stuart Hart. When I think of my path to being here today, I didn't even realize and remember that my path began as a seed at the University of Michigan. Before I was involved at all in academia, I was a board member at the Earth-Institute. So those of you that are listening that are related to the Earth-Institute, you didn't realize that it was going to take 20 years for a feedback signal to come back to you, that the seeds that you planted with me 20 years ago are now coming back with our work in the use of systems and the use of mental models to help implement sustainable strategies and programs. Just to place this in context, and Linda, I think you can go to the next slide as we're doing this, but as Gina said, we wrote the book back in 2018, and even prior to that, there was a first edition back in 2007, I think. Wow. So anyway, during that whole period, what was happening was that we were learning. And so we never dreamed that some of the things that we were doing when we first started would actually manifest themselves as quickly as they did. But here we now see ourselves today with living with the COVID-19 virus and so many simultaneous things happening within both the environment and society. We have the forest fires, we have the floods, we have Black Lives Matter, and we had air pollution. So the COVID-19 era that we're now living through is this stark awakening moment, and it opens up minds and it opens up possibilities. Linda, give it a click there. And one of the important things that we're going to try to thread throughout this presentation is the combination of what's happening in the environment and in the world, so to speak, and what's happening in each of our minds personally. So we really do need now to thread what's happening with our emotions and our psychology as we struggle to not be depressed and to stay hopeful while all of this is happening in the world. Next slide. One of the things that happens in the real world is that you have the things that you see and feel, like a forest fire, right? You're not going to forget that. But while that's happening, we have this whole system that's operating called the planet Earth. And the challenge that we see within sustainability is that some of these longer term things, like our continual and relentless decline in ecosystems, that is something that is harder for us to feel and emotionally connect with. And so many of you, I hope, are familiar with the ecological footprint as a measure of sustainability performance. And so before we launch into our discussions about systems and mental models, we want to remind ourselves that everything that we're doing is all interconnected into one single whole Earth. And so it's that idea that you only have one whole that we have to work within that's critical to the way we've approached this presentation. So we're going to move you now in just a few minutes from a common foundation building moment about what are systems, how do we use systems definitions and systems thinking to frame both the challenges that we're working on and the possible solutions that we see. And then we're going to move into how we have now applied that systems thinking and systems theory with looking at the Sustainable Development Goals specifically. And we've tried to weave in a little bit about educational systems as we've done that. And then we're going to close with a demonstration of a website that we've created with the intention of sharing and building collaborations to help all of this come together. Next slide. Again, as you saw earlier, we're trying to promote interaction as best we can in this virtual environment. And so we encourage you to put your Q&A, your questions into the Q&A section. We will be monitoring the chat, and we are committed to following up with every question, with every chat comment, because that's part of our DNA to get this all done. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Linda.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Last year, many of us here were gathered at Rutgers Business School for this landmark conference. This year, COVID-19, the global pandemic, finds us apart together. Our world has changed. Today, I'm sitting at my desk in my home in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. It's a little bit after, it's 10:38 for me, and I'm enjoying my second cup of morning coffee. What about you? Let us know. What are you doing? Where are you? And what did you have for breakfast? Take a minute and just check off one or more of your morning beverages. As you're doing that, I'm sure we'll find some interesting results. So here's my coffee. You see my cup? Looks like the cup on the slide. I wish I could share it with you. It really is delicious. Most people had coffee too. Yeah. Every morning, I have my coffee in this porcelain cup. It's made by a friend of mine in Great Barrington, just 10 miles down the road, Dan Bello. And I buy my organic Rainforest Alliance certified coffee beans from Assembly Coffee Roaster, owned by my friend and master roaster, Thomas Doyle. You see Tom's picture there. And I get my cream from the Jersey cows, like the one in the picture, at Highlawn Farm in Lee, Massachusetts. It's a beautiful farm on a low mountain not far from me. I believe in buying local. But how local is local today? My friend Thomas didn't grow the coffee beans. A farmer who's part of a growers cooperative in the hills of Columbia grew them. And they were shipped to a small distributor of specialty coffees in New York City, and from there to Thomas. Dan didn't mind the kaolin for his porcelain either. And it didn't come from Berkshire County. But it's possible that you might have a cup similar to mine because Dan's cups are shipped all over the world. And when I went to Hylon, I didn't walk the 12 miles round trip. I drove there in my fairly new but gasoline-powered Honda Civic. And again, I bought it locally, but it wasn't produced here. It required the work of hundreds of people around the world to develop and produce my car. So the point is that today, local is intertwined with global, and global depends on local. What's sometimes lost in the telling, though, is that getting each of these everyday products to me and to you depends on the resources of environmental, social, and economic interdependent systems. So how does this work? And why is this understanding crucial to sustainability? We're going to take a look. And in this process, while we're talking, and we hope you're thinking, we invite you to take notes, and particularly how you can further explore and use these concepts and practices in your work and in your daily lives. So, Bill, you want to introduce the systems and systems thinking?
Yep, I just have to keep reminding myself to unmute here, right? The classic virtual presentation.
Yes.
And I think that I'm having a little trouble with noise in my background, but apologies in advance for a bit of a fire hose here, but we had 1 hour and we're really trying to pack in a lot of material here. But you can look up in the upper left-hand side there, and we're trying to guide you as we're working ourselves through this journey about what is a system. We're going to talk about some system constructs, and then Linda's going to take it over and talk about nested systems and mental models. And then I'm going to close very rapidly with a piece on how I've been working to integrate life cycle analysis and life cycle thinking tools from a systems perspective. Next slide. So for those of you that don't have a background in systems and systems thinking, it's very exciting to introduce it to those that are new at this. And throughout this presentation, I want to give credit to the mentor that taught me so much, which was Donella Meadows. She's sort of the guru of systems thinking and the author of Limits to Growth and some of the seminal work that I've learned from. But when we think about the system at the beginning, the idea here is that whenever you're trying to describe something that is complex, that you tend to break it down into its parts or silos, as we're going to be referring to throughout this presentation. But those parts always comprise some whole, and the whole is greater than the parts. Its function or purpose can be something different and better than what you've built up. And another important thing that we're going to bring in throughout this is the idea of living systems, because there's both living systems. Those are the systems that are going to persist in nature, regardless of what we as humans do. And then there's the idea that humans are trying to create and invent systems that we can use to manage ourselves. Systems thinking, my last quick comment, is how everything that we're doing is interconnected. So the idea of interconnections in nature and interconnections between nature and humans, this is going to persist. And so you'll hear that throughout our presentation. Next slide. Again, real quickly here, when we think of systems thinking, there are some specific things that we can deconstruct and assess as we're trying to make sense of anything that we're examining. And the first part of it is, what is its purpose? Why did this system get created? Then the mental models, right? what do we think the behaviors of this system are? And what were some of our own reasons for wanting to get involved in the system? We're going to talk a little bit about resources and inputs to a system, because a system itself has the input flows, and then it has its outcomes and outputs. And those are the things that we're now struggling to try and measure. All right. And then we talk a little bit about the boundaries of the system. And that's where all of the interconnections between one system and another system happen, or between one part of a system, the other parts of the system, and then that all interconnects with the whole. Throughout, another critical element of a system is whether or not that system has any sort of time boundaries associated with it, right? So we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, and we now have this very critical milestone moment of 2030 as a time horizon. So have we integrated time horizons into our implementation of a system? And then, as Stuart Hart mentioned and others are mentioned, all of this happens through networks and through collaborations. So whenever we're assessing a system, we want to understand how that system fits with its other network systems and the collaborations of others. Linda, go ahead.
This is going to hold these slides and this whole presentation as though it were tapas, as though you're getting a little bit of a taste here and there, and preparing yourself for a deeper dive or for a whole wonderful meal. And as Bill said, we invite questions, we invite conversations later, but we felt that the overview here was pretty important in order to shift the conversation about sustainability, and to go back to what Stuart Hart said about the horse and the saddlebags. If we use the same old workhorse and just bolt on or throw on saddlebags of sustainability, we aren't going to get there. So part of our purpose here is to raise awareness and invite people to see sustainability from a different perspective, from really a whole systems perspective. And that starts with planet Earth. Everything we do, everything, who we are, what we can do, depends on the support of our planet. We only have one Earth. So society is embedded in the systems of planet Earth. And business. We, making a living, governing ourselves in the myriad ways that we do, is embedded in society. So this is what we mean by a network of systems. And I'm going to emphasize again that I am a system, you are a system. Together we form a social system. So this is systems within systems within systems. But often in our everyday lives, we don't hold it in that way. We forget that we are embedded in the environment of planet Earth, and we behave as though the environment is out there separate from us. We draw on society, but most of the drivers of our everyday lives for the past century and more has been looking at the economy and governance, as Stuart was giving some of the history. But business impacts everything. So let's see what we're doing now, and then see how we can rearrange this and make that view help us become more sustainable. So the business, economy, governance all depends on society and draws from society, the experiences, the knowledge that we all have. It also draws from the environment, the eco-resources. It gives back to society, but not in the same measure that it takes. It also puts back into the environment. And we are not doing well in that respect. We are operating in a way that is, by all measures, unsustainable. So what do we have to do differently? Because without the resources, we wouldn't exist. It really is all in our hands now, personally, locally, regionally, globally. So if sustainability is in our hands, what do we do? How do we do this? I mean, we can't just sit back and do nothing, can we? What we can do depends on what we believe to be possible. So as Mahatma Gandhi said, your beliefs become your thoughts. Your thoughts become your words, your actions, your habits, your values become our destiny. And this is all the realm of mental models. Mental models are human operating systems. So what are they? What comprises a mental model? It's all of our beliefs, all of the rules, all of the values we hold, all of the hopes and dreams we hold. And it's both personal and it is societal at the same time. Also, there are our experiences, the time frames, what we know to be our resources, what we don't see, where we have blinders, who we trust for information, our biases, the obligations we take on and that are put upon us, the dangers we see, what we worry about. All of this allows us to see possibilities and opportunities or not. Our mental models drive our feelings, our emotions. While we are pushed to some emotions, we don't have to keep acting on those. We have a choice of whether to do that or not. How we think, what we think about, and what we do. So mental models allow us to keep some of what we do, keep some of our ideas, keep going with them, holding on to them, letting go of others. I mean, I don't believe exactly the same things or do exactly the same things as I did when I was 10, and I doubt that you do either. Over the years and through our experiences and our education, we add on new habits, new ideas, both personal and how we operate in social society, and how we interact with nature and renew our spirit. These are our instructions. Our mental models are our instructions. It's how we determine what's true or false, what's right or wrong, and what, importantly, is real or unreal for us. Mental models are dynamic and iterative learning systems, and they have feedback loops. That's one of the major ways that we update our mental models. It's one of the major ways that we continue to build a bridge as we walk on it. We don't do this alone. We do all of this in cooperation and collaboration with other people. At the same time, we have to deal with, we as human beings, as human systems, are resistant to change. Mental models are network systems within us and outside us. I am a system embedded in lots and lots of different systems, including my family, my work, my country, my world. So how do we change? Systems have a predictable process of change. Not easy, not simple, but there is a path. So we were embedded in an old normal that we didn't think a whole lot about until COVID-19 came roaring into the United States in late winter and early spring of this year. That was a huge disruption. But let's not take that as the story for now, because disruptions happen to us all the time, every day, all the time. And yesterday, just yesterday, as Bill and Nalini and I were about to do our final practice, I had a disruption. I was standing in the shower, I was all lathered up, and suddenly my hot water turned ice. What happened? The break in my normal happened instantaneously, and I could not go back to doing what I was doing. So I jumped out of the shower, went down, threw on my bathrobe, went downstairs, found the refrigerator was off and the computer was off. So I went down to the cellar to check the circuit breakers. They were fine. So in my neighborhood, the electricity had gone off, but it disrupted not only my day, it disrupted Bill's day and Nalini's day, because we are all then trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we adjust? We're right over here. Let's draw on what I believe will happen. Did I do anything wrong? No, clearly not. Who can I trust for information? And go through that whole litany of mental models in order to figure out and test out what's going on. We finally did get it back up. I got back into the practice for this presentation, but it didn't ever go back to the old normal, because all day yesterday and even into this morning until I got here right now, I was thinking, am I going to have another tech breakdown? So these kinds of minor and major disruptions happen through life. And every time we and other living systems go through this same kind of a process of change. Radical change and horrible change is going on now in California and Colorado because of the fire maelstrom. So in Estes Park, Colorado, over the weekend, they were evacuated because the troublesome, and boy, is that an apt name, fire in Colorado was just about to roar through Estes Park. But unbeknownst to everybody, they got 12 inches of snow overnight. So by last night, after evacuating, they were allowed to go back. This is total disruption to a person's life. In order to deal with disruption that is complex, that is really wrenching, we need to know in great detail and what our resources are and be able to assess them on the fly. We get the feedback loops, whether it is for ourselves, whether it is for our environment, but that is how we cross over in transformational change. So Bill is going to take us through some tools to look at the resources that we have and how we're going to see other resources and how we're going to be able to assess them and employ them in our everyday lives and our work. Bill, you're on mute.
Thank you, Linda, for reminding me. So anyway, this is going to have to be a very, very rapid overview of LCA and how I've been working to take LCA and a systems thinking approach to integrate those two practices. So first off, LCA is an established standard from ISO, and it basically goes from creating a system, goal and scope and the definitions, and then we're going to be looking at, as we said in the systems constructs, what are the inputs to the system, and then what are the impacts of the system, right? So in traditional LCA, that's done through this from extraction to end of life process, where we're trying to create systems for measuring the raw materials and the energy consumption. And throughout that system, we're looking at the wastes. And the last thing I'll say is that LCAs, like the change process that Linda just described, is highly iterative. So we're constantly checking and adjusting throughout the process. Next slide. So on the left side, one of the things that we're seeing as we're trying to implement sustainability programs is that the process of a life cycle analysis, going from extraction through the consumption of products to the end of life of the products, that has now been modified and adapted to talk about, from a corporate perspective, the value chain of the company. So now the value chain is a flow of the input resources to the system to the business activities that the company does. That's the inside the fence part of what a company does. And then we have the products and the services that are the outputs from the company. And then what are those impacts and outcomes? And one of the things that has been seen is that if you view that only from the traditional financial flows or the traditional even life cycle flows of material, energy, labor, as you see on the right side, that is often insufficient when you're trying to do this from a sustainability perspective. And so now what we're seeing as part of the adaptation is the improvement of these accounting systems. On the left side here, we're seeing the integration of input-output models. Those are the ones driven primarily by the economic information flows. We also now see, as Stuart Hart mentioned several times, a circular economy, which is the combination of technical nutrient material flows with those of the biological and natural world. And we're also now trying to integrate those with traditional impact assessment methodologies like those from the insurance industry, or from the environmental side, we have human health risk assessments. And from the business side, we have cost benefit analysis, right? So we now know that resource flow analysis alone is insufficient, and we need to continue to improve our ability to connect the resource flows with the impacts. And so these two, physical risk impacts and transitional risk impacts, were developed, in this case, by the financial institutions. These were standards that are now being used to communicate climate change risks to the investor community. And so we're building on all of this in order to create better systems. Next slide. So one of the skills that I wanted to bring out with respect to using LCA is this idea of hotspots and creating strategies that are taking just a few of the processes, a few of the parts of the system. But if you can improve those parts, then you're going to have the greatest effect on the whole. And hotspot analysis is one of the methods for doing that. And so on the right side, you'll see sort of this idea of creating paths between the product Y, and then you're looking at different tiers of the economy that are used to create that product. Next slide. And just as an example of how that works in the real world, this is an example of how a soft drink manufacturer can look at their product from the perspective of climate risk and carbon inventories. So you can now start to look at it and say, those are the processes in tier one, those are the supply elements that are used to create that soft drink. Each one has their own carbon inventory associated with it, whether it's 80 tons for electricity in the tier one supply chain. But then as you go deeper into the supply chain, you can see that electricity again shows up as 32 tons as part of making plastic bottles. And even in tier three, electricity was the major source of the carbon inputs to alumina. So now we can start to see that if we make one transformational change, like going to renewable energy, how that's going to cascade throughout that entire product's carbon footprint system. And now I'm just going to very quickly show you how the idea of taking a whole, like the whole Earth, and then dissecting it into parts. So the Sustainable Development Goals are taking that whole Earth system and converting it into 17 systems that each work independently, but they also are interconnected. Next slide. Other systems exist. This one is the World Economic Forum, and that one was developed by CEOs to understand what were the most highest and probable impacts to businesses. Next slide. This one I wanted to introduce to you because it was a framework that recognized multi-capital accounting, and those capitals are the inputs to the system. And then when we said, what is the ultimate purpose of business? What is the outcome that we're trying to generate? And using the daily triangle, it recognizes that the single outcome that we're all trying to work towards is the well-being of people and the well-being of everyone. Next slide. Throughout this, I'm going to be reminding everybody that we work in this world of science. And we also work in a world where business is not the ultimate system, but the Earth is. And so therefore, science is telling us that there are several Earth systems, these ecosystems, that life support is dependent upon. And so our ability to manage these components of the system may be crucial while we're also trying to manage the personal systems that we work with. And note that some of these systems we don't even yet know how to measure them. And I'm going to come back to that later. With that, let's open it up for some questions very briefly, and then we'll try and move on.
And as we said, we will be very glad to answer questions via email later. So do we have a question or two that we might, that people have asked here?
Yeah, Bill and Linda, one of the questions asked is, what would be the difference between systems thinking, SMART, and SWOT?
What was that again? SMART and what?
SWOT.
SWOT.
Okay.
Well, certainly, you know, if you take a look at the Sustainable Enterprise Field Book, we do use strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats as a way of assessing business opportunities.
And you can use
you could use SWOT.
You can use either SWOT or SMART applying with a system. But the key thing here is the distinction between applying on or systems thinking as a system within a system. So systems thinking is really a natural capability for human beings. We focus our education so much on learning about specific areas that we tend to forget that it is an entire system. So if you want to drill down into a particular area of finance, for instance, yes, use SWOT, use SMART, but remember that it is networked into all other kinds of systems. It is because of the networked awareness that we're able to then handle what would otherwise be externalities or unintended consequences. Those come up and really bite you when you forget to keep in mind the other threads and the other impacts that you have.
Linda, we're going to
I see another question. It says, Kevin Webb asked the question, the indigenous people have knowledge to manage the forests, etc. Why aren't they being co-opted more?
Oh boy, I wish I knew the answer to why not. But that's one of the things that I will at least mention briefly later on as we get in the next few minutes of this presentation. But thank you. And I'll put some other things in email about that we can share all around.
Yep, I can see we're already going to be time challenged to get through this. So if we could Go to the next slide. We're now moving into our next segment where we're trying to show you how those systems theory and systems thinking can contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. And next slide. So one of the things that we realized was that we were always trying to struggle with the managing of limited resources. So that was one thing that we had to acknowledge, was that some of the capitals that we're working with within this system are limited. And in order for us to properly manage limited systems, we have to appreciate that people tend to work in their self-interest when they're working with incomplete information. And in order for that to change, we have to give them a transparent picture of the whole, and we have to get people to collaborate and trust so that we can work together to manage those common limited resources in a way that they're available for everyone in a sustainable, continuous way. Next slide. And you can look at that slide later to get its full value. But within all of this, we have to realize that there are things like technology that's emerging that give us opportunities to manage the data within a system. And that chart on the right is about all of the different inputs that we're now collecting to do life cycle analysis. So technology is a great asset for us to do all of this and to manage limited resources. But at the same time, technology has started to create silos and the siloed thinking, which is preventing people from being able to even see what the whole looks like and what are we trying to attain in the collective commons view. So this is the challenge that we're trying to work with. And with that, I will turn it over to Linda.
So one of the things that we did in the Sustainable Enterprise Field Book, in order to deal with some of these very sticky, very complex issues in a doable way, was to look at systems through lenses. So whether it's economic, technological, poverty and equity, constraints, talent, or geopolitical, or anything else as lenses, we're going to take that approach to looking at the Sustainable Development Goals. And what is it that is going to help us to accelerate progress for the sake of humanity on Earth? So we're going to take also a kaleidoscope approach, and anybody who's used a kaleidoscope knows that you look through the lens and you shift it and the patterns change. Now, why is that important? That's important because when the patterns change, it allows you to see different sets of relationships and highlights focus on different areas than you would see otherwise. So we've done this with the Sustainable Development Goals, and we're going to go really quickly through this. But as we had with some of the nested systems, here in the middle, you see the finance and accumulation of wealth. That's primarily what the focus has been for businesses and the drivers in our Western society for quite a while. And looking at that in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, what supports that? We really need to have industry and innovation in infrastructure. We need some economic growth, decent work, yeah. Affordable energy helps. People who are hungry don't work well. Responsible production, yeah, a little bit of gender equality in recent years, but look what's left on the outside. Here's the carrying capacity threshold that goes along with the planetary boundaries, and tragedy commons looms large. So do unintended consequences and externalities. But right on the edge in the zone of decline of resources, you see climate action, good health, that we see poverty increasing, we see clean water and sanitation not being addressed, in fact, moving backwards. and life below water is sacrificed as well as life on land. So what happens if we shift that? If we have a different lens in the center, if we have Earth lens, all of a sudden, everything else shifts like the kaleidoscope. In the center we have partnerships for the goals. We have still industry and innovation and infrastructure, but it takes on an entirely new meaning. We need peace and justice and strong institutions in order to produce the social goods of sustainable cities, decent work, no poverty, zero hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality, reduced inequalities, and the environmental goals of responsible production, energy, better management of life below water and rewilding, climate action, clean water. So you notice how everything shifts when you shift the lens that you're using. If we then look at a humanity lens, we're looking at in the center that is going to support this and essential, because we can't survive without food, without clean water, without some kind of affordable energy. What's missing here is clean air. But all of that leads to better health and well-being, because if we don't, as a humanity, live to be able to sustain ourselves, we aren't going to get to anything else. But what we want to focus on here also is collaboration, because none of us can do this alone. And this shifts, if you look through the lens of collaboration, you get something entirely different. But I'm going to move quickly here to focus just on one as an example, and I've chosen zero hunger. And it rearranges all of the other goals. So it begs the question, who is hungry? It's not just people in the other countries out there. Whatever country you are in today, there are people who are chronically hungry. What systems need to change? But more importantly, what systems are keeping hunger and people chronically hungry in place? So as I stood in my kitchen yesterday and I was picking over grapes that I'd left too long and they were wilting, I was thinking about, what if that was all I had to eat for the day? If that was all my family had to eat for today? Because that's the state that some people are in. And most of us, all of us, have had hunger pangs at one time or another. And some of us have been in conditions where we had hunger for a real hunger and unable to find food or adequate food for a short period of time. So situational hunger, a day, a month, a week, but probably not more than that, because we are able to buy the food that we need. That's not true for everybody. Oop, back. Sorry about that. Right now, we are going the wrong direction in hunger, so that 2 billion people in the world are food insecure, in a world that produces enough food to feed everyone. Small-scale farmers have been hit by the pandemic and the economic downturn that is a result of the pandemic. We are eating our way through the marine resources. And in addition to pandemic, we have fire maelstroms, we have floods along the Gulf Coast here in the United States. England, India and Bangladesh and China have been really hard hit. We have drought in many of the food producing areas of the world, whether it is Central Europe and Ukraine, whether it is Southwest China, whether it is Brazil, sorry. And then, of course, the Horn of Africa has been hit by an invasion of locusts. And add to that armed conflict. All of these are things that are impinging on the systems that we need to address in order to achieve zero hunger. And remember, we are already producing enough food to feed everybody. And it's predicted that if we change our eating habits and if we change our distribution habits and if we change our agricultural practices and land management, we are going to be able to produce enough food for 9.5, 10 billion people. So shifting the lens and seeing the relationships and gathering the cooperation here is really critically important. Part of that is reducing the system of waste.
Yep. So basically, what we've seen now is that the system is highly wasteful, which presents opportunities from a material flow standpoint. But how do we know, and when are we feeling whether or not we are advancing in a sustainable path? And so I just want to bring up a few key things here, which is that we have to create measurement systems to tell us in what direction we're performing. And if we design those measurement systems properly, then it'll be helpful. But if we design them wrong, then we can be going off of a cliff here. Next slide. So with the Sustainable Development Goals, some key things: transparency and designing how are we measuring these resource inputs for all of the goals. If we can do that in a common way, then we can start to design those hotspot paths and say which of the goals are best using which resources to have the best outcomes. And critical to the best outcomes is that those outcomes have to be grounded in science, because as we've said, science is going to trump the economy at the end of the day. So we're trying to create future states of the environment based on science, and then create our paths to the future that are going to attain that future state within the resources that we have to get there. And with that, we're going to take one question and try to do a poll really quickly.
And
the poll coming up now.
Here's a question. Oh, you brought up the poll.
No, do the question while they're doing the poll, Gina.
Okay, what is your opinion on some agricultural practices of getting rid of corn in the sea for mere reason of keeping prices and their profits?
I mean, just obviously, that would be an economic-centric behavior that we would disagree with. We're going to need to not waste any of the precious biological resources and foods that the planet is generating.
Oh, Bill, here's a great question. What do you think about sustainability accounting being mandatory or voluntary?
Look, I love it as mandatory, but we can't force people to want to learn anything. And so we're going to have to accept that if accounting is going to be a subject that everybody wants to learn, then we're going to need to make it connect to their real lives and how they behave. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
And we can answer some questions about agriculture and agroecology via email later.
I'm thinking about poor Nalini, who's going to have to show you something, but why don't we show the results here, and then we'll give Nalini just a second to introduce our website.
Yeah.
Nice little spread there.
Yes.
So, and that's not surprising. We do allow people to work in more than one realm at the same time, but just to show you sort of where we are as a group, this is great. And with that, I think we need to just let Nalini give you a little bit of a taste of what we've been working on, and then we'll close out.
Yeah, because this is then a way to continue participating here in bridges to the, we have to build the bridges to the new future.
Linda,
Yeah.
can you, I would like to take the share screen. I think you have to stop sharing. And
we did just move from the slides to a live website, so hopefully that works.
Yes.
Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so we'd like to quickly introduce the Building New Bridges website, which is part of our overarching online living field book that we conceived and designed over the last 2 years. And with the onset of COVID and with the onset of all the disruptions that's happening in our personal and in a business environment, we want to bring together this shared knowledge website, which we've designed from, as Bill, Linda, and Stuart also mentioned, to move from a personal journey towards a global level. How our individual mindset, our individual beliefs shape as we collaborate with a group at a regional level and move to the global level of changes. We would like to curate and present information as a funnel to the vast information that is available at 3 levels: personal, global, and local level. This entire framework is based on a metaphor of a bridge, where we begin the journey with hope, we adapt, we collaborate, and innovate to reach a common goal. Each individual page would have icons representing the material, which could be in the form of a webinar, a podcast, a video, and we highly encourage all the audiences to please share with us if you would like to showcase any of your personal effort or your organizational effort towards the goals. And as we explained before, in the global level, we've tried to present all the organizations that are involved in this collaborative effort in providing new transforming methodologies and methods. And we can click, the website has been designed to be navigated towards the article or the webinars that's of interest to you. For example, the pandemic resistant economics will take you to a webinar. We also, within the website, I know I'm going very fast, but I'm trying to make sure I can present the availability of information within the website. We have a whole portion called the Learning Guide, which can provide supplemental information to all practitioners and educators on what mental models are. We wish to showcase more learning guide materials on systems, on this is a work in progress, but we would like to show the power of presenting these information from a sustainability framework. And this is an ongoing current website, and we encourage all your inputs and when you visit in this site. Here, thanks, Linda and Bill.
Gina, I think we have time for a question.
We do, yes.
We have 1 minute for a question.
Yeah.
We have a question. Part of the challenge is we are so disconnected from nature. An example of this, even the language we use in describing elements of nature.
Linda, can you put up the presentation?
What?
I'm not seeing the presentation.
No, I can put it back.
Yeah, please.
Fish are resources or stock, cattle and pigs are livestock, forests are timber, water is drinkable water, etc. How do we develop language from a systems thinking perspective that is more holistic and reciprocal? Great question.
It is a great question.
That was from Kent Williams.
So I think of it, I have to plug David Attenborough. And for those of you that are wondering, his movie that just came out on Netflix, it really inspired me. But can you go to the very last slide, Linda?
I'm getting
Okay. So anybody, as we the second to last slide there, as we were just talking about, languages and nature, I'll just like to close with Pope Francis and this hugely inspiring way of being that I think sort of it captures the work ahead. So the comment about language and everything. So let's think about our future here as one where we're all able to be living for others as that has been the rule of nature all along. So those poor cows that are going to be stocks for people, well, that may be what nature intended them to be. But the other part of it is that we are all interconnected. And so I'd like to leave you with the thought that all of you, your work matters. You're interconnected with us. I'm very happy and hopeful because you've been able to share our thoughts with you. And we look forward for your work to be shared with us. And we're going to try and amplify that for everyone.
And if we monitor our speaking from recognizing that we are only one component in the larger system, I think that eventually, for myself anyway, that helps me to speak in a way that is both inviting and respectful. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We're sorry it ran through so quickly, but we do hope that we can continue this conversation in the future.
And our information's on the slides as well. Thank you so much.
That was, excuse me, that was a fantastic presentation. We will post the slides. Excuse me. And I love this quote from Pope Francis. So it's awesome. I'm going to actually read it. Rivers do not drink their own water. Trees do not eat their own fruit. The sun does not shine on itself, and flowers do not spread their fragrance for themselves. Living for others is a rule of nature. We are all born to help each other, no matter how difficult it is. Life is good when you are happy, but much better when others are happy because of you. I love that. Thank you so much.